Welcome to the EZCODE Projects series maze video number 6. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects maze series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. In the last video, we added the logic to randomly add right walls to our maze. In this video, we'll continue with the logic to add random bottom walls. Remember, just type as I do, pause the video, or slow down the speed when needed. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Let's first review the Eller's algorithm again. So I'm going to open up Google Chrome. I already have it at the website that we found the logic for. And we're just going to go down to step 4, because now we've created the right walls in step 3. And we're going to create the bottom walls. And it says to ensure that each set has at least one cell with a down passage. And it says, as an example, without a bottom wall. Failure to do so will create an isolation. Okay, so we're just going to close this out now that we know that. And we'll go ahead and open our project directory in VS Code. So let's open up VS Code. Open the Explorer panel, open folder, projects. This is where I keep it here. And that's what we want, the maze folder. Now that that's open, we'll open the code.js to the right. And now let's consider that adding the bottom rows, it seems pretty straightforward. The only difficulty would be that we must assure that there's at least one down passage per set. And remember that this set is just the unique identifier that we've given each column. And a set may be more than one, or at least the same number in many different columns. So that means that if there is only one column in a set, it cannot have a bottom row. It must have a down passage as it's specified. So we could just create another for each loop like we did for the right walls using next column. So remember that we did that here. But how would we know how many cells are part of that one set? Like, we know we can get the next column, but what about the next one and the next one? Each time it's iterating through the loop, we would lose the ability to look forward. How many times do we need to look? If there's 6 columns in that set, it gets really messy really fast. So that logic would be quite painful. So a good question to ask ourselves when programming is, what can I do to make this easier? So let's manipulate the structure of our row array to make it easier to check for multiple sets. So we're going to be in this loop, as we have the row for each. We're going to go outside of that because now we're done adding right walls. So all the elements of the row now have right walls, or at least randomly have right walls. And the next bit of code, we'll just start typing here. We want to do a const. It's going to be let's call it group by set. So we'll say, hey, this is what it is. It's a group by set. And we're going to equal. And now here is where we're going to use something a bit different. So instead of for each or map, we have another powerful function on the array class. And this one, we're going to say, give us the array, the row array. And we're going to use reduce. And reduce takes a couple arguments here. We're just going to pass in a function into the reduce function. And it's going to look something like this. We're just going to type it out first. The first one we're just going to call obj for object. And the next one we're just going to call column. And then we're going to do the array brackets. And now I'm not going to open these up yet. Here's the curly braces we would normally open up. So this function right here, that's the first argument to the reduce. Now we're going to put a comma after it. And we're going to provide an empty object. And in JavaScript, all you have to do to provide an empty object is give it array brackets. So we're passing in two things. One's a function, one's the array brackets, and let's just complete this with a semicolon. Now, really important here, we're going to open up the function we're passing in. So I did it this way first so we could see what is going on here. So group by set, the row array, we're going to run the reduce on it, and there's going to be two arguments here. The first argument is actually going to be this item that we're passing in here, and we're just going to open up our function. So right between the first set of curly braces, we're going to open up like we would a normal function. And you can see it gets a little confusing because you'll see the item that we're providing is way down here. So now that you know it's down there, this is what gets passed in here. This is the first item into the array. So this is a way for us to gather information through the array as we iterate through it. And the first item of the array is going to be the column. And then as it iterates through, in this case, there's 8 columns in our row. There's going to be 8 different columns that we're going to go through, but the object is going to remain this thing right here, like a skeleton. Think of it that way. We're going to put a bunch of items on our skeleton here. So now that we have this open, I'm just going to go over here and backspace and enter like that, because this is how we normally are doing our functions, like this, like this. So here's our 2. And let's just tab into it and we'll get started. So the thing that we're going to group by is going to be the set number. And to get that, we could just say, hey, column, get attribute everywhere we want to use this, but we only want to do that once. So we're going to say, hey, data set, the property we created, give us that value and reassign it to set number. And now we're going to open up a little bit, and we're going to do a few different things here. So what we want to do is we want to take the object, and we're going to give it a key, and we're going to assign a value. So that looks something like this. We're just going to open up an object. I can do this anywhere. If I wanted to make, let's say, make my object, and it will equal the curly braces, and now we just have key value pairs. Now the key can be a string, or in this case a symbol, and on the right it has to be normal values in JavaScript. This is a string. We could do a number. We could do make something up, and it's undefined. So you can just see key value, key value, key value. The key is what we're going to call it. So if I said make object, let's go down here quick and say, if we did this, make object, now we can do dot notation. So we can say map object key, well, that'll return the value, the string value. Map make my object dot number gives us 8. Make my object, make something up will give us undefined. So this is a way that we can assign values, but also, and in some languages, this would be called something like a dictionary. There can only be one key. So if I went down here and I said key is now butter, it's going to first assign key equals string value, and then it's going to assign key string value butter. So we can overwrite them, but there can only be one. So this is a quick way. By reducing, we're returning the array values into an object like this. So I just want you to see what that looks like. And let's go back here after getting rid of that. And now we can say, hey, we're taking the object, which is this piece right here. And we're going to say, just like in the array, if we need to assign a key to it, we're going to do it this way. And the key is going to be the set number. So object, the key of it is going to be a unique identifier, so a unique set number. So if there is a data set number of 00, great. There's going to be an object key of 00, and there's going to be a value to it. And the value is going to be, it's either going to be the object So let's say there was already one created, there already was a 0, 0. That's what's going to, it's just going to reassign to itself. But if there isn't, then we're going to do some tricksies here. We're going to do an OR loop, because that means if I call the object with a key that doesn't exist, we're going to get undefined, which makes this false. So just like we did before when we were doing the true and false up here, there was, once this is false, oh, here it was in our OR loop here. So if this is false, it's going to the next check. Same thing here. If this is false or undefined, which is a falsy condition, then the OR loop will go to the right. In this case, it's going to say, let's create a blank array, and a blank array, we can push values onto it, and the value is going to be the column. So we're getting a little bit of redness here, and that's because I opened a parenthesis here that I'm going to actually close way over here on the left. So what we're doing here is we're saying object set number, which is going to be any 2-digit string number that we had created from the data set. And it's going to say, hey, we need to assign this key with either itself, because if it's already assigned, just reassign it, the same thing, or create a new array and push the column onto it. So after that, just like the map function, we need to return our accumulator here, which is the object. So the object now will get passed in again to the next reduce, next column, same object, next column, same object, next column. And we're gonna look at see what this thing looks like. So don't fret, you can go over this again as you have some time. This map and reduce are the powerhouses of most programming languages. And so we're just going to do a console log, and we're going to say group by set, comma, and then we're just going to put in our variable that we had here. I'm just going to get rid of a couple lines. And now let's save our work and load the view.html file in the browser. So we're going to go ahead and save it. We're going to open up the browser. Looks like we had the dictionary come out. Let's get rid of you, dictionary. We don't need you. And let's open up the browser there, and file, open file. Guess what we're doing? Projects EZCODE maze source view.html. That's the one we're loading. This is the file we load that incorporates everything else. And here we go. Open up the developer console, and let's see what came out. So what were we doing here? We were doing group by set. So this was getting run, if you remember, for each row. So there should be 8 here. And this is the first row. So let's look at what did it make. So here's the keys. Here's the keys that we were talking about. 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 4, and 0, 5. And this only works because these keys were strings. If this was a number, it's not going to let you do 0, 0. It'll just reduce to 0. So these are strings that came in. We assign them, and there's only going to be one. So again, you can see there happened to be, on the first row, there's only 1, 0, 0. So it said, here's the key, here's the div. This one, there was 3 of them, and that's what we can see. We got a key, and we got all 3 divs. So we know we can look and loop through each one of these keys to get the value of the array, and loop through them and say, okay, well, there's 3 items here. There's only 1, 0, 4, and there's 3 0, 5s. Great. So second row, same thing. We have 0, and then they're all 0, 1s. Here they are. These are grouped together. So this is a quick way of grouping things together. Don't be afraid to reduce. It's a fantastic function. And we don't even have to pass in the object. We can pass in an array and do work that way, or an object, or a number. We can do all sorts of things. So now that we have this, and let's go back to the code.js and use what we just created. And we'll see how that gets a bit easier. So I'm just going to close this out, actually just bring this up here. And let's see, we have multiple ways to iterate over an object. So we could do a for loop, and we could loop over this new thing that we created. Or we could do, I like to do a lot of inline type stuff. So I know we have this console log here. I'm just going to get rid of that for now because we don't need it anymore now that you've seen it. And we're going to do something in JavaScript that has object entries, and we can pass in our group by. And it's funny, we made an object, and what we're going to do is we're going to take that object and create and then turn it back into something we can consume again, so like an array. So let's just copy, you know what, we'll just console log this. So we'll just keep that console.log, and let's take a look at what this has given us before we do that. So I'm going to save our work, and I'm just going to return to the browser real quick. And let's just refresh the browser, and you can see what it did. So object entries gave us this now. So it's an array of arrays, and in the array, in each subarray, the first property is the key, and the second property is the value of that key. And what's handy here is by doing it, by setting it up this way and then putting it in here, and we're just going to get rid of this console log, but we're going to keep our object entries. Now we can just do a for each again, and we know what that's like. We have we'll give it a function here. The only trick here is each argument coming into our for each, the first one is going to be, let's go here, it's going to be an array. So this is the thing we're going to get back. And we can deconstruct this by just going, let's go back over here. We can just deconstruct it, and we're going to keep the array thing there, and we're going to call the first argument is going to be key, and the second one's going to be values. So again, this is a for each loop. So after that, we would have index and we would have array, but we're not using those. We're just using the items it's passing in, which is an array. And we know through deconstructing that it's going to say, look, the first thing we're going to call a key, the second thing we're going to call an array, and if it had more things, we could just continue by saying, okay, you know, the third thing in the array is going to be called butter. But we have two things. We have key and we have values, exactly what we need. And now we just have to open up the, let's see, go back here in between these parentheses, space, open up our array, and we're going to enter curly braces. Might as well put the semicolon there before we break this open, and in here, just like we've been doing to all the functions. So when we're putting a function inside of another function, just know it has to end with the parentheses. You can see there's the end, here's the beginning, and now we have what we can start to do for our logic to do the bottom section. Okay, so now that we have our group by set iteration going on here, let's start to add some logic. So we're going to add an if statement, and what we're going to do is we need to know if the values, so this would be the right side of that object that we looked at. So let's say the key is 0, 0, and it had 3 items in the values array. We want to look and check that array. So we check the length property that's on the array, and we're going to say greater than 1. And can you imagine why we're saying greater than 1? I'm going to open this up, by the way, in curly braces, because when it has only one member in that values array, it means there's only one column. And if you remember the rule from the algorithm, it said if there's only one item, it has to have a down or an access point below, so it can't have a bottom row. So if you're greater than 1, and we know we're not creating a bottom row because we're the ones creating the rows. And if we go down here, we're creating a top. And if the row index is the last row, we're creating a bottom. But that's it. So the bottom one, that's fine. The bottom part of the array or the maze, the matrix, that's fine. But here, we know we're starting from that it doesn't have a bottom. So anything above greater than 1 means that we're going to apply our logic correctly. And so Well, what do we have? Well, let's see. We want to iterate through however many there are. We don't know how many there are, so we're going to say values for each. And just on this one, we just need the item of the array. We don't need an index or anything like that. So we're just going to open up the array brackets. I'm sorry, the arrow function and the curly braces. Put our semicolon down here. And now we're set up to put things into our for each loop. And we're going to say, okay, well, are we going to add a bottom? And it's just like the walls on the right. We need to randomize this. So we're going to create a variable, a constant because it's not going to change. And we're going to say add bottom. Just like our add wall, we're going to say, hey, do we need to add a bottom? Let's ask the randomizer. So randomize, and we're just going to put in our array again. And we're just going to put in a 50-50 type chance. And we're going to open up. And now we're going to say, well, are we going to add a bottom? So we need to choose. And we need to say, hey, if add bottom. And so when we use variables like this, they have to be true to break into the if statement. So if I did put something here, if I put a false here, a false boolean, if false, this is never going to run inside the if statement. Let's actually make the brackets. So inside of this if statement, this will never run. And if we put hard-coded value of true here, it's always going to run. So, but we're using this variable. So if this variable is true, meaning it's this, then it'll break into our logic. So we don't have to sit here and say equals true. This is saying the same thing right now. So it's kind of like a shorthand way of doing that. Like before, we were doing if value null. Let's see if we can find out where that was. Maybe it was down here. If row is equal to null, null is a falsy value. It's not false itself. It's not the actual word false, but it's a falsy value. So we could just say, row here, but we're being overly cautious just so we understand, hey, when it's null, that's when we want to do this logic. So back up to where we were. And so we're saying, hey, if add bottom is true, then we want to add a bottom. And what are we calling the item that's in the value array? We're calling it COL for column. And we're going to affect the style of the HTML element. And you guessed it, it's going to be border bottom. And then we're going to equal our normal border we were doing. We were doing 1px solid black. So CSS knows this type of assignment. We're not just making this up or just because we wanted to. This is the actual CSS assignment if we did put it in the CSS style sheet. So it knows what to do with this type of string. And let's see, we have this here. We have add bottom. We got the logic for ifs. Do we need any more parentheses? Everything's looking good. Okay, so let's save our work and refresh the browser. And if we crossed our fingers correctly, we're just going to refresh here. And wow, that's great. We actually, a little bit of celebration, I think, is in order because we've come this far. And this is quite a bit of logic that we're going through, especially if you're just beginning with these types of things. Again, just pause the video when you have to and type exactly as I did. And if you run into issues or you have console errors over here, it could be a typo. Just go back again, look at the video and type out what's there. But this is looking really good. We're getting a lot of good logic here that's actually working. And it actually looks like a maze, at least kind of like a maze. But let's note that some of the cells may be isolated. So if you remember from the algorithm sheet that we were looking at the website, it mentioned isolation. So what did that mean? And if we look here, we can see here, there's borders everywhere. Here, this is completely isolated. I can't get in it or out of it. And then here, we can see this is completely isolated. Here, all over the place, we have some isolation. So where are you gonna, we come into the maze wherever, you can't make it all the way through. So if you don't have this on yours, because it is random, so yours is going to be slightly different than this one, just keep hitting the refresh button until you get some form of isolation to look at. So again, here's some more isolations, and we can see our numbers changing, and things are working. It's just not working exactly right yet. So we'll fix that next. So let's go back to the code.js file. And we need to check the values array after we apply the border bottom and check if all of them have it. So the idea is when we're going in here and we're saying, hey, for each value, randomly select. Sometimes it's going to randomly select to apply a border bottom to all of them. And if you remember from the algorithm, if there's only one cell, it must have access or no bottom to have access to the next row below it, and at least one of the columns has to have no bottom so it doesn't create isolation. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's first check the values and see if they have a border bottom property. So to do that, we can use, once again, we are in our for each loop. We have our entries right here. So we're going to remain in the object entries here, and we're going to remain in if the value's length is greater. So, but not inside the values for each loop. So just click here and get where this ends. We're going to open up a couple lines, and we're going to do another constant. So what do we got here? Let's call it no blanks. If there's no blanks, and we're going to equals. So we got to take the values array again, and now we're going to use a different method on the array, and we can have two different types here just to go over them. We have an every, and we have a sum. Not as in mathematical SUM, but sum as in are there any? And so we could look and say sum if at least one of them. That's what we're asking with sum. It's like, is there one or more? We want to know in the special case, does every one of them, if every one of them satisfies this condition. And the every function, just like map, or at least map and for each, we're going to take in, let's see, the values. It's just going to be the value, which is, in this case, let's just stick with what we were calling it. We were calling it column or COL. And that's what we're going to check. And we're going to do an arrow function. And we can just keep this as a one-liner instead of opening some curly braces, which we can do. But if we do it that way, we have to use the word return. But here, the arrow function is like a shortcut to just return what we're looking at here. So for every, all we have to do inside of our function is return true or false. And if it's true, it'll come back out in the response to no blanks. If it's false, it will not be there. So we're going to say, okay, if every one of them is true, will be true for no blanks. And if at least one of them has a downspout, this will be false. But let's just see how we're going to do. We're going to say column, and what we're going to do is we're going to check for a border bottom. So if this has a value, it should have this value right here, and that's going to be a string. And any string that has characters in it, any sort of characters, is true. What isn't true with the string, and just to go over this quick, this is a blank string. There's nothing in it. Now there is something in it. There's a space. So that's true, false, true, false, true, 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 false. A blank string is always falsy. So it's not the word false, but if we said if blank string, this is the same thing as saying this, if false, which means it'll never happen. So just so you know, a blank string is false. So if this comes back with a blank string, then it doesn't have a border bottom. Now we can just put at the end a semicolon, and we'll open up another string here, or another line, I'm sorry, and we're going to do an if statement. That's how we do them, and we're going to say if no blanks. And now instead of an or, because we need to look at something else too, because we have to say we have to see if the row index is not equal to the last row, because we don't want to necessarily, we don't want to get rid of the bottom row's border because we know it's going to have one. So instead of doing or, what we're going to do is we're going to do an and. So this is the double standing line there. That's how you do an or, and how we do an and is double ampersand. So this means this has to be true, and on the right side also has to be true. Then we'll break into the if statement. And we got a little bit of logic going in here, so I'm going to surround it by a parentheses, and we're going to say row index, and let's see where we're at here. If we look up where our row index is. So again, we got a lengthy bit of code here. So row index and row way up here, which is fine. I just want to give you a reference on where those are coming from. This is all contained within this for loop, which means we have access to anything that's populated inside of it, or outside of it, I should say. And so we have no blanks, and the row index is not equal to, and I'm going to open up another parentheses. I like to keep this separated, and we're just going to say, so any array dot length -1 always means the last index of the array. Always, always, always. Doesn't matter where you are, what language you're in. Usually you'll have some either dot length, dot size, whatever. -1, we're talking about the last index of an array. So if the row index is not the last index of the array, and our special exception, there's no blanks, too many borders, we're going to open up into our if statement, and we're going to say, well, we need to remove the row. So let's look at it this way. We're going to say let's see, how are we going to get the column, I guess? How would we say, we're in this loop here, and we need to select one of the columns, at least one. And what are we looking here? So we know the values array has the elements we're talking about. So here, what we could do is we're going to just say, well, give me one column. How can we do that? We can use the magic randomizer, and all we have to pass in is our values array. So our values array is an array of those divs. Let's see if we still have it here. I mean, this is what it looks like. It's a row of divs like this, and those divs are HTML elements, which have lots of properties given to us, and functions and everything else. And mind you, these are just objects that we were talking about before in the reduce function, with lots of properties and methods and tons of stuff on there. Key value pairs. Again, here you go. Here's a key, the value null. Key value null. Key value is style property map. So we got another object, really. These are just key of an object. Here's another object here. And you can just keep nesting and nesting these. Here's key. There's an array. There's a string. There's a number. There's a... Well, if we go far enough, you're going to see, you might not see the methods on here. They might not show them, but tons of information right here at our fingertips. So we're using the HTML items. That's what this array is of divs. And we're just going to say, hey, give us one. And now that we have one, we can say, okay, we're going to set the style, which is a border bottom. And we're going to say, you're now an empty string, which again before is going to be a falsy value if we had to look through it again here. Okay, so one last thing that we have to do, and it's about the bottom row, and it's during the assignment phase of the create row, which if you remember, this method is going to iterate, and we're going to always have the previous row here coming in, and we had to look and see. There was a little bit of logic that we had gone over before that was in regards to if the row above had a bottom row. And if it did, we needed to reassign or remove it We had to give it a unique index again. We were not going to reuse the set number that was with it. So all we have to do here is pretty simple, and we're going to go in here and we're going to say, look, we're going to look for is it the first row, or we're going to look at one more thing, and we're going to say if the previous row's column style is that of border bottom, like this, and this will be truthy or falsy. So in either case, if it's the first row or the column we're talking about has a border bottom, then we need a unique index. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and save our file. Now actually, let's do one more thing since we're in here. I had already deleted the console log from up here, and if you want to keep console logs in here, that is at your leisure. I'm going to get rid of this one just to keep things a bit clean. I use them when I want to use them, and try to get rid of them when I don't need them anymore. So that's a little bit of cleanup here. We don't have any, we have good spacing here. We have, our brackets. This is fairly easy to read through, and we're looking good. So let's go ahead where we made changes, and we're going to save our file. And now we're going to go to the browser, and we're going to go ahead and hit the refresh button, and we can see there's clearly a difference here. We don't really see any isolation. I can see here, at least here's those single cells, and we can see 07. I don't see any single ones having any downspouts. And then let's see, we have here's a good test case. We have a bunch of 12s here, actually just a 1 and a 2 together for what used to be the row index would be. It's not the row index anymore. This is our unique identifier. And we can see, boom, this one most likely had all of them set, and there's our downspouts. So we got a good one. And we can see too that the 12 is being copied to the next row because there wasn't a downspout, and where there is, it doesn't get copied. So this actually has 0, 1, 2. This is the third index, so that's right. So this is looking really good now. I would say we're real close to what we need to do here and finish up. So let's just go ahead and hit the random button a few more times, just because it's fun to watch this thing generate itself. We're looking at a physical resemblance of the algorithm that we're building. So boom, boom, boom. We still have some isolations, and we can see them that they're down on the bottom row. And there was one more specification in the algorithm that called for what to do on the bottom row. And we're going to go over that in the next video. So we'll definitely start by reviewing the last bit of that algorithm. And nice job, everyone. Our maze is super shaping up. This is almost complete. And in the next video, we will complete the logic required for the algorithm. So if you enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. I thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.